Good afternoon and welcome to the 12th Annual National Postdoc Appreciation Week. I'm Tom Kimbus. I'm Executive Director and CEO of the National Postdoctoral Association. We at the NPA are thrilled to have you with us and join in your celebration. Congratulations for all that you do inside and outside of your work. The NPA founded NPAW to provide greater recognition for postdocs. And this year's NPAW theme, I Am A Postdoc, is focused on the deeper aspects of early career researchers, not just what we know of postdocs from your work. Today's session, Virtues, Values, and Vocation, looks at how these aspects of life can guide you as postdocs in your careers and beyond. Before we turn to today's speakers, some important points for you. One, remember NPAW does last all week. Tomorrow you'll have the opportunity to meet former postdocs who have successfully applied the skills and knowledge gained through their postdoc training in a diverse array of professions at our Connecting for Career Success networking event. And then on Wednesday, our partners at the Postdoc Academy are presenting a workshop in which postdocs will reflect on the identities important or salient to their career planning and show how they connect to career pathways or professional development. These national events complement the hundreds of local ones across the country, many of which are virtual and which you can join even if you're located at a different institution. So you can just sign up on the calendar on the NPAW homepage, which is linked in the chat on the right side of your screen. Second, the NPA is proud to be the national voice of the postdoctoral community, but our voice is only as strong as our membership. If you're a postdoc and you haven't signed up as an affiliate member of the NPA, please do so today. It's free to almost all of you. In fact, we're on a special campaign launching today to push for 20,000 members. We're very close, but we need your help to get over the hump. We'd love to do so during NPAW. As part of the 20K push, we launched a 20 for 20 campaign in which you can donate $20 to the NPA by simply texting the code 20 for NPA to 44321. It's easy, it's greatly appreciated, and it supports the greater postdoc community. Again, see the chat up to your right for that information. Third, during NPAW last year, we conducted a postdoc needs assessment survey. We have an even shorter version of that survey that's available this year. And this survey helps us understand how we can help you meet your needs. Completing the survey also makes you eligible to win an Amazon gift card. The link is in the chat, and all of us appreciate your taking just 5 minutes to complete it. The information is critical, so please take the time to complete the survey after this session. In addition, the NPA is forming a new leadership group, the NPA Postdoc Council. It's brand new and is going to provide insight to the NPA Board of Directors, our committees, everyone here on staff, as to what's needed most by postdocs. It's an outstanding new leadership opportunity for you as a postdoc, for the right postdocs of any discipline. Nominations close soon on Wednesday, September 29th, so now is the time to apply. Once again, the link is in the chat. And very lastly, NPAW is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors, Gallagher Insurance and Protein Tech, both of whom supported NPAW now for 2 years in a row. And now for our speakers. In this week's theme of I'm a Postdoc, we know that postdocs are more than just individuals serving in discrete training periods. They're leaders, managers, volunteers, and mentors with skills far beyond those within their discipline and driven by their values. This session's theme, Virtues, Values, and Vocation. And postdocs are individuals who operate under an umbrella of virtues. Dr. Robert Pennock, University Distinguished Professor at Michigan State and President of the Science Honor Society Sigma Xi, a very close partner of the NPA, will address this topic in just a moment. He'll be followed by Dr. Keith Micoli, Assistant Dean for Postdoctoral Affairs at NYU Medical Center and a longtime friend to the NPA, on how to use your strengths, including your values, your interests, and your skills as you move along your career path. The speakers won't be taking questions today, but feel free to exchange your comments with your peers using the chat function on the right side. But To start us out, I'm thrilled today to present a message from a very special NPAW guest, the Honorable Sethuraman Panchanathan, who is the Director of the National Science Foundation.
Welcome to National Postdoc Appreciation Week 2021. My name is Sethuraman Panchanathan, and I am the Director of the National Science Foundation. I have the distinct pleasure of leading an organization that supports so many postdocs across the sciences and engineering in a myriad of ways. We are extremely proud of the fact, and thank you all for that each and every one of you do to move forward the frontiers of science and discovery. As we begin the second virtual National Postdoc Appreciation Week, we must recognize the impact the COVID pandemic has had on postdocs. We at NSF know that the transition from doctoral degree to postdoc research and from your postdoc to your first career position are critical transition points. That is why NSF is continuing to take steps to better support you during these important career moments. We are increasing funding for fellowships and creating new programs to fund postdoc research. We have also made supplements to postdoc awards to give individuals more time to make these key transitions during what we know is a uniquely challenging time. On your end, you've all weathered this storm and continue to produce valuable research and training in all areas of science and engineering. The efforts you have put in over the past year are so encouraging for those of us examining the future of science and engineering enterprise. I want to thank you all for all that you have done and will do, whatever career you choose, whether it is in academics, industry, or otherwise. As a mentor of over 100 students and postdocs, a past member of the National Science Board, and now Director of NSF, I know the pathways you can take from your postdoc position are numerous. It is NSF's pleasure and my pleasure personally to support you in your work as you decide which of those paths is right for you. Please, as you continue in that work safely, take the time you need for yourself and make use of the various resources available to you. Know that you and the work you do is valuable and appreciated. Enjoy National Postdoc Appreciation Week 2021.
Dr. Pennock, pleased to turn the microphone over to you.
Great. Thanks very much, Tom. And thanks to all of you for the invitation. I'm pleased to speak to you on behalf of Sigma Xi, the Scientific Research Honor Society. Some of you may already have been inducted to Sigma Xi, but for those who are not familiar with the society, let me just give a brief overview. Sigma Xi is an organization that honors exemplary scientists and promotes scientific investigation. You may know it by the magazine American Scientist, which Sigma Xi publishes. You may know it from the Grants in Aid of Research program, which has been funding scientists, early career scientists, for over 100 years. Founded in 1886 at Cornell University, but now with members all over the world, Sigma Xi typically inducts early career scientists, sometimes when they're still postdocs. So the honor is not necessarily based upon having demonstrated a long record of discoveries, though many inductees do have impressive publications. One cannot apply for membership, but must be nominated by a member who vouches for one's accomplishment or potential for noteworthy original scientific investigation. More than 200 Sigma Xi members have received the Nobel Prize over the years, including Albert Einstein a century ago in 1921, to Jennifer Doudna and Andrea Ches just this past year. The Greek initials of Sigma Xi stand for Spudon Xinonis, which means companions in zealous research. This motto expresses the connection between the community and the purpose of science. And this is what I want to talk to you about today in terms of the ideas and ideals of virtue and vocation. So we want to ask about what it is that your work and your work life calls you to do, what it means to pursue your life work, to do so with integrity, with excellence, and what that pursuit requires of you. And I think a vocational virtue theory can help us answer some of these questions. So I'm going to start by talking about this idea of vocation. Now, in the United States, I know that not all of you are from the US, but here we have kind of a narrow view of that term vocation. People think of it as VOTEC. Vocational schooling here is classified together with trade schools, technical schools, and other career schools. These teach specialized skills for specific careers. Right. But the term vocation really is much broader, and that's the notion that I want to talk about, where you really think of vocation as being an occupational calling. It's a calling that requires special dedication and often special skills for some worthy purpose. Now, because the terms become more associated maybe with religious callings, it's somewhat rare today to speak of science as vocation, but I think it's worth resuscitating that usage, for it rings with a warmer tone than the sort of frosty and sterile term of profession. The word vocation has its roots in the Latin vocare, which means to call, and the notion of following a call is more important in science than the notion of professing, which also has a religious etymology, but stems from the idea of a public declaration or confession of beliefs. And really, science isn't like that. Science aims to follow the evidence and reject appeals to authority. So scientists really ought to shy away from being seen as professors in that type of sense. Rather, the notion of listening and following where the evidence calls is more fitting. Moreover, the concept of vocation really carries with it a sense of moral structure that's appropriate and I think deserves greater emphasis in science. Science is an occupation with a worthy purpose that requires special dedication. The scientist is someone who has heeded the call to explore and discover. So in the passion and the ardor that are part of the mindset of someone who's called to this vocation and becomes a disciple to its special practices, that's what it is to adopt the identity of a scientist. Now, I'm not the first one to talk about the idea of science as a vocation. There's actually a very famous piece by Max Weber, the sociologist, delivered at a speech at the University of Munich in 1918, more than a century ago. And in his talk, he began with sort of an overview of external factors. I mean, he's a sociologist after all, about the profession of science, the differences between how it was organized in Germany compared to the United States. But then he moved on to this core discussion about what he called the inward calling for science. Okay? And Weber spoke about this in emotional and sometimes almost quasi-religious terms, suggesting that science required a passionate devotion and an enthusiasm, right, where that term enthusiasm really has the idea of sort of bringing in sort of the spirit of the enterprise. Now, this connects in Weber's mindset the way that science was becoming, even at that time, very specialized. And as postdocs, that's really what you are all experiencing yourselves. Weber's talk highlighted that it's no longer possible to know much about even the neighboring areas of research. Science had already divided into different disciplines and subdisciplines, and even within these, scientists must direct their focus even more strictly, putting blinders, he said, on extraneous distractions. Weber said that one's scientific calling must be similarly restricted. He wrote, inwardly, matters stand at a point where the individual can acquire the sure consciousness of achieving something truly perfect as a strict specialist. Definitive and good accomplishments in science that no longer can be resulting from specialized focus, specialized training. And really, for those who've gotten a Ph.D. and then gone on to become a postdoc, that's really what you're doing. You're becoming more and more specialized. Weber said, only by strict specialization can the scientific worker become fully conscious for once and perhaps never again in his lifetime that you've achieved something that will endure, which is to say, right, a discovery, a novel discovery. Now, if you ever look back in American Scientists, you might remember the cartoons from Sidney Harris, who's really one of the preeminent cartoonists. And one of the ones that I remember from American Scientists was of a scientist being introduced at a party, and he's obviously been introduced as being a specialist on the crocodiles. And he says, no, really, my specialty is the crocodile's eyelids. And it was really to sort of put in a lighthearted way this idea that really you've got to be pretty specialized now to become an expert in science. And that's the next part that I want to talk about, this idea of expertise. Because part of what you've done as a graduate student to get your Ph.D. and now to go on to more specialized training even further than that is that you're gathering the knowledge and the skills for someone to say that you're trustworthy for what it is that your specialty is. Okay? So for a scientist, here's the question. On what basis should a researcher be able to give testimony that's trusted, that's trustworthy? Okay? And from a philosophical point of view, I'll just say that the answer has to be in terms of evidence. Okay? The evidence of your own character, that you have the integrity that's requisite to your vocation, and the specific expertise, right? And the embodiment of scientific values together with the application of scientific methods in your particular area is what makes you, right, a trustworthy proxy for the evidence. Okay? And it's because you as a scientist are known to embody those values. That's to say you have a good epistemic reputation, right? It's because of that we may reasonably believe that you've got properly the methods and the knowledge, you've done the observations, you've done the experiments, and that you have the judgment that you've developed in order to testify in a trustworthy way about the result. And the idea is someone else who's gathered that same expertise, that same experience and training, would get the same result had they done it themselves, right? We might express this a different way, which is to say that scientists should be thought of as trustworthy, not because they're authorities, but because they're experts. And the terms are actually kind of important to distinguish. I want to sort of say a little bit about how to do that. Authority in the strict sense isn't something that scientists really ever could be, because authority is something where the idea is that you have, by virtue of your authority, the power to authorize something. That's to say you have the power to make something so just by your word, in the way that an author does. Okay, the author gets the first word, the final word, and every word in between, right? The Latin root of the words authority and author both have the same idea of originating something, right? And in Middle English, it takes on the sense of being the maker or the cause of something. Right? In a religious sense, it's the same way that you think of God as spoken as the author of the world, right? The creator of the world, and so on. But on the other hand, and quite in distinction to this, to be an expert is to be expert at something, is to be skilled and knowledgeable about it because of experience and practice. Okay, the Latin root of expert is experire, which means to try, right? And from that same root, not only comes the word experience, but also experiment. Okay? So to try something is not just to attempt it, but to subject it to a trial, to test it. Okay? And that's the basis of all scientific findings. The knowledge that one has by virtue of being expert is unlike that of an authority. Okay? They're different areas of expertise, different areas of application, and really completely different in terms of their justification. Okay? We're really interested here in the justification. In the case of authority, something one claims to be so is so because one says it, right? Saying so makes it so. Authority must be granted. Okay? The judgments and pronouncements of a person in a position of authority are justified by virtue of their position, which gives them the relevant legislative power, right? The power is not absolute. It's limited to the scope of their authority. In the case of an expert, however, something one says so is so because one has the requisite expertise. Okay? And expertise isn't granted. Expertise must be earned. The judgments and pronouncements of a person with expertise are justified by virtue of their experience, which gives them the relevant technical knowledge. Okay? The knowledge of experts is also not absolute. It's limited to the scope of their expertise. Okay? Authorities are justified because of the power they hold, while experts are justified because of the knowledge and skills that they have. Okay? So put another way, authorities may pronounce, to say, process, because of who they are and how they were granted their authority, but experts may pronounce because of what they know and how they came by that expertise. Okay? Now, there are a few cases in science where authority and expertise coincide, such as when society grants a profession special privileges that require licensing. Right? So in such circumstances, scientific professionals do stand in a position of authority with regard to certain matters that are taken under their legitimate purview. So the most common example of this is in medicine, right? Physicians are granted authority, for example, to pronounce the time of death. Okay? But that's really different than what we're talking about here in the more general sense. Authority and expertise are different. When a researcher reports back to their lab colleagues about something they learned at a professional conference, they don't cite the presenter's name as justification. They cite the data. Okay, that's why the question, "Where's the evidence?" is the appropriate challenge to a scientific expert. Okay. In responding to such a challenge, the final appeal in science is not to persons, even to divine ones, right? But to impersonal evidence, not to "I am who I am," but it is what it is, right? To the evidence itself. That's a basic difference between science and other kinds of forms of justification. Okay. An appeal to someone's title, except as a proxy for evidential warrant, is a sign of unscientific deference to authority. Scientific meetings, it's actually rare to hear anyone's title or their degree mentioned. The informality of attire and address is really the norm there. You don't wear ties pretty much at a scientific conference. It's not uncommon for scientists to look somewhat disheveled. Okay? Scientists don't care about researchers' appearance or their formal titles. We just want to see their graphs. Okay? That's who we are. Okay? And that gets us to this idea of identity. Okay? And Weber talked about this. He says, whoever lacks the capacity to put on blinders, so to speak, and to come to the idea that the fate of one's soul depends upon whether or not you've made the correct conjecture in this passage of this manuscript, may as well stay away from science. That person will never have what one may call the personal experience of science, right? The experience. Non-scientists may ridicule the scientist's strange intoxication, he said, but without this passion, without this 1,000 years must pass before you enter into life, and 1,000 more wait in silence, according to whether or not you succeed in making this conjecture, that's to say whether your hypothesis is right or not. Without this, you have no calling for science, and you should do something else. That's what Weber said. Talking about this as a calling, it's something that really defines who you are and how you feel and are motivated in the passion of what you do. Now, I mentioned another person who's talked about this from the philosophical side, which is John Dewey, right? And he was really important in the idea of pragmatism and the founder of functional psychology, educational reform. Dewey is actually influenced by Aristotle, and I'll talk about Aristotle in a minute. And he specifically focused on this idea of how it is that we develop these feelings through habit. And he thinks that habit actually plays a significant role in the account of moral behavior. Now, Aristotle explains the role of habit in the development and expression of virtue, and he characterizes habit as the repetition of similar activities. Now, Dewey says it's more than just a repetition, that really it's a kind of acquired predisposition to ways or modes of response. Okay, habits, he said, are like tools in that they provide the means for the accomplishment of one's intended ends, right? So Dewey insisted that habits really shouldn't be thought of as passive. They should be thought of as energetic, even dominating to the degree he said that they rule our thoughts. So it's obvious with regard to bad habits, but he argued that it also holds generally. All habits, he said, are demands for kinds of activity, and they constitute the self. In any intelligible sense of the word will, they are will. They form our affective desires, and they furnish us with our working capabilities. Now, in acquiring a set of habits, we're shaping the desires that lead us to action, as well as the kinds of actions that we're capable of performing reliably. That's another thing that makes us trustworthy. Okay? And it's because these things together are so fundamental to who we are as individuals, and because he equated this to our will, that's why Dewey argued that these habits, these values, these forms of action constitute the self, right? They are really who we are. They form our identity, our identity as researchers, our identity as scientists. Now, this is what I want to talk now briefly in terms of the general idea of virtue theory. It does start from Aristotle. Aristotle thinks of this idea of virtue not in the way that we do. I mean, we have a pretty narrow notion of virtue, sometimes in a way that's almost dismissive, but Aristotle thinks of virtue in a way that connects action and ethics. Okay, he says virtue is a settled disposition of the mind that determines our choice, really our proper choice, of actions and emotions. And on virtue theory, the general virtue theory that Aristotle articulated, the idea is that these get judged in relationship to the human purpose, what he called the telos, or the end. And for human beings, he said, really, that our goal is to actualize our human potential, right? That means our potential as rational animals, because he thought that's what was essential to us. And all of this action was in the service of what he called eudaimonia. Sometimes that's translated as happiness, but really I think the better translation that philosophers use now is flourishing. So the idea is what we do is in the service of human flourishing. And Aristotle analyzed this very generally for human beings, and the virtues that he called the cardinal virtues, prudence, courage, justice, temperance. These were all meant to be things that we need to develop as human beings in order to achieve flourishing, achieve the human end. And we learn these things from others who've had experience through what he called those who have practical wisdom. Now, my work has been to sort of take this general view of virtue theory and to apply it to vocations. Okay, so narrowing it down to ask not what is virtue broadly speaking, but what is a vocational virtue, is to say, what are those traits, those character traits, really the mindset, if you will, of different vocations? And I'm just going to use the example of science here. But here you'd analyze it in a similar way. You'd say, what's the end, the goal, the purpose for science? And I think we can all agree that it's really to discover truths about the natural world. That's what we're after. What does flourishing mean in science? Well, it means to have a flourishing research culture that promotes that seeking for satisfying our curiosity, finding out those truths. And the vocational virtues, the specific virtues, are those character traits that are conducive of that practice. Now, I'm not going to go into the background for this philosophically, but there's a way of kind of articulating what those particular virtues are. But to back that up, I wound up also doing a national study where we interviewed 1,100 scientists. It took over 6 years. We've got 500 hours of interviews. We asked them, what are the traits that make for integrity, make for excellence in science? And they match what theory tells us. The core virtues are things like honesty and curiosity, right? Naturally so. We want to figure out things about the world. That's what drives us. And there are a bunch of related virtues that have to do with this idea of evidence, humility to evidence, objectivity, skepticism, perseverance and patience, and so on. These are the virtues that as a scientist, you want to try to cultivate. It's not that we all have them by nature, although I think everyone is born with curiosity, but you have to develop and cultivate it in a special way to be able to do this scientifically. It takes a kind of disciplined practice, which is what I think we should think of science as. It's really a kind of practice. Other practices, other vocational practices, have other core virtues. Like for engineering, it's not so much curiosity, it's more being innovative, right? Because you want to design new things, create new things. For medicine, the core virtue has to do with empathy, right? It has to do with a feeling towards those that you're serving. But my point here is that for whatever vocation you have, these virtues are what determine your vocational identity. And they do so because that's what constitutes vocational culture. Now, just to end, I'll circle back a bit to Sigma Xi. I previously mentioned that Sigma Xi's motto is companions in zealous research. And I think of this as being something that indicates what I call a vocational friendship. And in Sigma Xi's constitution, again, from previous century, they actually spoke about it in terms of scientific friendships as something that's necessary to support sort of these ideals, what they think of as what's highest and truest in science. They talk about friendship in science and says, while those whose heart and soul is in their work and are coping with the great problems of nature, let them remember that the ties of friendship cannot be investigated, but only felt. And let them join heart and hand in forming a society of this sort in science and engineering to promote and encourage by these strong personal attachments of friendship the highest and truest advances in the scientific field. Okay. Now, as postdocs, you've already dedicated yourselves to some specialized pursuit, and I'd say to the ideals that define the culture of that vocation. And as you continue your career from now on in this postdoc and sometimes a second one, eventually this will lead to what I hope you'll find, which is a community of like-minded people of that sort. One in which you can express those values and be yourselves. But I hope that you'll also, in that same time that you're doing that, with friendship, welcome others into that fellowship and into that virtuous pursuit. Thanks very much.
All right. Wow. Thanks, Dr. Pennock. That was amazing talk. I wish I weren't following you in my talk, but I think you set the stage nicely for what I would like to carry on with here in moving things ahead. So I'm going to share my screen and see if we can get this to work. All I can see is be here. It's a great honor to follow such fantastic speakers as we've already heard. I wish I was able to see you all in person. I wish I was able to see any of you. Right now, I'm just staring at my screen and I feel a little bit like I'm incoherently babbling. But we will get through this virtually together. And I'd like to spend 20 minutes or so just talking a little bit about this idea of vocation that has been talked about and finding your why and personalizing your postdoc journey. I've been part of the NPA from the very beginning. Since I was a postdoc, I've been at NYU for 13 years as first the director and then assistant dean for postdoc affairs. And I really have made it my life's work to improve the postdoc experience. And a lot of what motivated my desire to do this was some of the negative things that I experienced as a postdoc. And the NPA was a huge positive factor in my life at that time and has always been so. So I would certainly, if you take nothing else away from this talk, use the NPA, be a member, be active in it, and there's really no limit to what you can accomplish through this group. I'm so impressed by even the idea of the 20,000 member push. The first NPA meeting, I think, had about 100 people in attendance. So the growth is amazing, the dedication and professionalism throughout the organization, throughout its entire history, is unmatched in my experience. And I'm so glad to be here and to give this talk and to hopefully help you all get a little bit more out of your postdoc. And the first thing I would say is the first lesson that I learned in my professional life, and then also in working in the outdoors and bringing people outside and on backpacking trips to do leadership training, was committing to your goal. And I've done tons of hiking and backpacking that has been really bad and really good. And I'd say, like, it's very easy to remain committed to your goal when everything is going your way. In this photo, I was on my first night of my first really major backpacking trip. And really, this is a perfect end to the first day. I thought everything is going to be amazing. And then the second day of 10 days was this shot where everything I had was soaking wet. I spent the day in this lean-to just watching the rain come down and feeling really pretty miserable and wondering what I'd got myself into. And really had to question during that day, like, why was I doing this? Why was I putting myself through this misery, and what were my goals? And that's what I see. A lot of postdocs come to me with goals that are as big as this, and you're this little stick figure trying to achieve it. And this could be, the goal of getting a faculty position, going into industry, whatever it may be. It's usually a really big, somewhat vague goal, and that it's really unclear how you're going to achieve that goal. And that can get very frustrating and discouraging. And so a lot of people turn away or change their goals. And I would say, don't change your goals, but you should change what you're doing to achieve those goals. It's just madness to keep doing the same thing over and over, hoping that the result will be different. So what we do is try to work together to set intermediate goals, more near term, that you can focus on and feel like you're making progress every day and moving up and achieving that ultimate goal someday. And again, when we hear success stories or we hear people come and give career talks, it's often somebody who appears like they made all the right decisions, right? Like that's just going up and up and up. And that's almost never the case. There are sideways, you go backwards, you go forwards, but it's always incremental. And people don't go from nowhere to success overnight. So the things that you're doing today matter in terms of being successful tomorrow. I like to work with people and figure out, like, what is your dream job? And a lot of us have not really thought about that in a real way, in a real introspective way. For myself, I just kind of felt like I was pushed along the academic pipeline and ended up in academia, but so far along that it was kind of too late to change, even if I wanted to. But I hadn't thought about why I was into that. And there's a lot of things that you can do with your PhD. So I organize What Can You Be with a PhD, along with a wonderful team of help and volunteers. But when people ask, like, what should they do for their careers, this isn't even a complete list that you're looking at here. It's really only limited by your imagination. And there are PhDs working in virtually every profession that you can think of. So it's more about what's the right job for you and why do you want to do it. And most postdocs come to me with a list of their skills and they've identified themselves and their prospects based on the skill set that they possess or what skills they need to develop in order to get a job. And they haven't really thought about whether they're interested in that job, and even less often do they think about what their values are and does that profession fit with their values. And so I would really like you to think hard about this, not just now, but in the days to come and weeks ahead, thinking about what's important to you, and understand that what's important to you is fine. And you don't have to apologize for your values and what you think is important and what you want to get out of your professional and personal life. So thinking about the working conditions that you want, what the workplace itself values, how it rewards performance, and taking into account your personal and family considerations. I see a lot of people attempt to split like their professional life from their personal life. And I don't think you can really do that effectively and still be a whole person and happy. So keeping these things all in mind is important. Just as a quick exercise, looking at this is a list of workplace values. And if we were doing a longer workshop, or if you've done the My IDP, you would have to rate each of these in terms of how important they are to you. So if you could just take a moment to look over this list and mentally just make a mark by the ones that you feel are most important to you. And we can, I was going to say we can talk about this. We can't talk about it now, but you can put it in the chat, and you can certainly reach out to me later on after the talk if you want to have any conversations about it. So just take a moment to look this list over. Okay. So when I started really thinking about this, and I've done these exercises for over 10 years with groups large and small, and it's really interesting to see what comes out as core values for people and for myself. And it has helped steer me in the future, as I move towards my future, as to what it is that I really want to do and what I really want to accomplish with the time I have. The second lesson that I'd like to talk briefly about is to know the price of success. So if you understand where you want to go and the career you want to pursue, I think it's very important to understand that all of these come with sacrifices and they all come at a price. And one of my hikes, this was a 130-mile backpacking trip. That was my first solo backpacking trip. I saw this picture that many people had posted online, and this was what I want. That was like the picture of success. And that's what a lot of us see as far as professional aspirations. We see the success, but we don't see what went into that. And for myself, this was a 10-day trip. There were many things that went wrong on this trip, and not all of them fit well with taking pictures. But this was, for me, the price. Was my feet were destroyed. 6 years later, I still have problems with them. And I will say, like, even knowing what the price was, I would do it again. And I have done the same hike again 5 times out of the last 6 years. So another trip that I did was an attempt on this hike in the winter with a group of 5 others. And the temperatures frequently went to -20 Fahrenheit. And this was the morning that our group decided to turn back and not pursue achieving our goal. And I think that's important to keep in mind as you pursue your career goals, is reevaluate. what's going on, both in your life and the conditions, and whether it makes sense to keep going on. There's a lot to be said for perseverance, but it's also important to know, like, when your safety is being called into question, what are you going to do? And so I've counseled a lot of people who are in science and pursuing scientific careers who ask, at what point does it should I turn back? And I think that's something that everybody has to answer for themselves. But again, I used to give this talk and say, like, just go forward no matter what and never quit. And I've found a real life situation where our values of surviving were in conflict with the conditions, and we decided to turn back. So understand, learn what the price of success is going to be as best you can, and make a conscious decision as to whether you're willing to pay that price. Along with understanding what success is going to take is understanding what skills you're going to need to develop in order to be a successful candidate and ultimately be successful in that job. And so it's always good to look at what are your transferable skills. If I asked everybody here to put in the chat what their top skills were, most people will put scientific skills. And then when you go out on the job market, you're competing with everybody else who has those same scientific skills. So figuring out what sets you apart from others and developing those skills while you're a postdoc, I think, is one of the best things that you can do for your career now and going forward. So here's another list to take a look at. And I would ask everybody to sort of look through this and think which of these skills are areas where you really need to develop more in order to be successful. Not necessarily that these are weaknesses, but areas where if you develop this skill, it would make a big difference in your professional life. So take a minute. Yeah, I'll give you 1 minute to look through these items and sort of just gut reaction, which are the most important ones. Okay. So if you have your list of skills you want to develop, you can start working on a plan with the time that you have left during your postdoc to develop those skills. And I would say, again, don't wait for the perfect time or for the perfect opportunity. The third lesson here is to do your best with what you have. Take advantage of the opportunities that are there, and don't waste time and energy bemoaning the fact that not every opportunity is there all the time when you're ready for it. Again, like, this was from that ill-fated winter trip where we came in and we camped here in extremely deep snow. We made the best of it. We got through that night and it was really okay. But understand, this is not ideal camping or backpacking conditions. But we didn't spend time complaining about that. We just got to work, made our camp, made our dinner, got in our sleeping bags, and got through that night together. And I would say, in your postdoc, there's plenty of things to complain about. But directing that energy in a positive way and figuring out what can you do is a much more productive way to go. I mean, I've tried it both ways. Being positive is a lot easier and more fun in the long run. Lesson 4 was to never give up. On this hike, not the winter hike, but my first hike, I was on my last day. I knew I was close to the end, and really was just at the end of my rope and at the end of my patience. I sat down on this bridge, soaked my feet in the water, and I was really as close to giving up as I had been in the entire 10 days. If there was a way I could have just gotten picked up by a helicopter there, I might have taken it. And I didn't know this, but I was actually very close to the end, and a couple of day hikers came from the end, and I knew that they hadn't been on the trail long because they smelled really clean and they looked really clean. Compared to here, if you look at this picture, my pants are actually a light tan color, not that dark brown, which is just mud that has soaked through every fiber of my clothes. And 20 minutes later, I was at the end of the hike in Lake Placid. And often this is the case during your postdoc, is you don't know how close you are to being successful. And I would just say, like, stay in it, keep working, keep pushing, look for support. There's always people willing to provide support and resources to you, but you're often closer than you know to being successful. And I would say, like, work on your plans. Use this week to figure out some concrete ways that you can move your profession forward and make connections. And I think this quote is really true. A year from now, you may wish you had started today. And I will leave you with this photo from the latest group of NYU Women's Intensive Leadership Development Program that we revived this year after taking a year off from COVID. And this group is going to finish the entire Northfield to Lake Placid Trail in the next couple of weeks. But together we did hike 130 miles in 11 days. And this is the success photo that I couldn't be prouder of them. And I would say is a testament to living these values that I've talked to you today about, was doing what I really felt passionate about. And I'm glad to have this chance to talk to you all today, and hope that you will all take some inspiration from that and realize that there are no limits except what you put on yourself to being successful. So thank you. And thanks to the NPA for giving me this chance to y'all. Oh, good. So there is a chat. There was like just this horrible moment where all I could see was my slides. I'm like, boy, I really hope there's some people out there.
Hey, Keith, and thank you so much, Dr. Micoli, for that amazing presentation. And it's been a pleasure to hear both you and Dr. Pennock speak. Thank you for joining us. I think these two presentations were amazing in how they complemented one another, from exploring and questioning, using the virtues that come with work in science and research, to Dr. Micoli, your presentation focusing on your values and interests and exploring your goals and assessing them and how to conquer them, or perhaps turn away from them at the right time to make the right decisions as you chart your course forward, sort of seamless integration, and comes in the light of our overall theme for this week of, I am a postdoc, and what does that really mean? So thank you for both of you for your time and such wonderful material. Dr. Micoli, I know you use slides. Those slides are actually available and can be downloaded right here, just to the right of the chat function. You'll see there's a handout, grayed out lettering that you can click on, and there should be Dr. Micoli's PDF if you'd like to download that. What a fantastic way to kickstart NPAW. And as a reminder, this is just the beginning. You can visit the NPAW website that's up on the NPA webpage. You can find that right in the chat function near the top, where Amy Wilson has posted a number of the different important links to the web page with the calendar, a full calendar of events. We've got national events that are coming up in addition to today, to tomorrow and on Wednesday. We also encourage you to enjoy your local events that are happening across the country and actually across the world, from Europe to South Africa. So NPAW is beginning to spread. As a reminder, as you look at some of those links, help us reach our goal of 20,000 NPA members. We're so close, and we can do it during NPAW. As a reminder, that opportunity to become an affiliate member is free to most of you if your institution is a member of the NPA. You just have to sign up on the NPA page. So we wish you all the best, and thank you for joining us on this kickoff day of NPAW. Enjoy the rest of your week.